So today's daf is daf Nun Tes, and we're discussing animals that swallowed poison, and therefore we can't eat the meat, even if the animal's not treifa, because it's endangering our lives if we eat it. However, in the case of something called tia, which we'll try to figure out what that is, the Brisa states that you're allowed to eat the meat of the animal. My tia, Omer Rabbi Yehuda. Now we start our daf, and he calls it Ikara Dimri Ruta, which in fancy English is called aconite, something that belongs to a certain plant, a family of plants, that has clusters of hood-like flowers around it, and the leaves and roots of many species are poisonous. Omar Rav Yehuda. Haiman, these are cases of people who overdid it with regard to eating, and as a result, they died. One is the case of ochal tlosa tikle chiltos. Chilta is a very dangerous kind of a growing thing, and he ate 3 shekel weights of chiltis al liba rekan on an empty stomach mishtalech mashkie. And Rav Yehuda warns us that if somebody eats, or shall we say, overdoses on this chiltis, then he will have a fever and his skin will start shedding. Amar Rabbi Abba b'didi avi uvda. I had a story in which achli chad tilta. I ate only 1 shekel's weight of chilta, and yet ilo yosvi b'mai. If I hadn't run into cool water, then mishtalech mashkai, my skin would have shed. However, since I studied the science of it, therefore, kiyamti biatzmi, I fulfilled for myself a pasuk in Koheles of hachachma techaya baleha, that wisdom sustains its owner. Meaning, because I studied, I knew that I had to immediately cool myself down in cold water. It's very interesting because in our family we had cases where our little children, as they were growing up, they had a high fever, and we put them in cold water. Omar
Right.
Yosef, hi Mandi Ochel Shitzrei. Look how much he ate. He ate Shitzrei 16 bay eggs, the arboy and 40 amguze, kind of a nut. And this was all on an empty stomach, apparently. V'shev butisa de pirche, 7 caper berries. Anyway, Shasi revered the duvsha. I'm not exactly sure what kind of honey it was, but it was apparently a very liquidy honey. So honey is a liquid, and he drank it. And this was during the heat of the summer months, B'tkufas Tammuz, al liba de on an empty stomach, misaker talia de libe. So Rav Yosef warns us that such a person who overdoes it is going to get a heart attack and die. Hahu bar tavya the asal reish galusa. A deer came into the house of the reish galusa. I have a cousin who lives in Edison, New Jersey, and a deer once came into through the glass, got caught in on the glass of his porch. Anyway, Davi mafsik Karen basraisa. So the legs of this deer got severed, and Rav checked it out, Bitzomas Hagidin, which we learned about in the previous daf, and Achsherei. And he came to the conclusion that none of the sinews in the Tzomas Hagidin had been punctured, and therefore he was ready to eat it. But God saved him. And Amalei Shmuel says, Lo chayish mar lenukure. Maybe the reason why this deer had its legs severed was because of a poison through a snake bite that impacted on its legs. And that poison might have spread throughout its body. And now you, Rav, if you eat the meat, you might be swallowing the venom of a snake. Amalei, Rav says, my takata, what should I do? Nosfe v'tanur. Let's check it out. Let's see why the legs or the hind legs were were severed. We're going to take the, that what's left here and put it into an oven, the iu badik nafshe. And then, so to speak, it will examine itself. In other words, Shmuel is saying, through my knowledge of science, I'm going to predict that you'll be able to know whether or not this loss of the hind legs was due to a snake bite through this experiment. Osve, they put it into an oven. Nafal tilche, and the meat just fell apart. And why did it fall apart? Because apparently this was the impact of the venom of the snake. And the fancy enzymes give a name here, but it doesn't matter, the snake venom. And each one, now Rav and Shmuel say something about the other one. Kari Shmuel alei to Rav. Shmuel called out the pasuk in Sefer Daniel, referring to the wisdom that apprehended the possible danger and suggesting a means of exposing it. And that's based on the pasuk that says, Lo yu'una l'tzadik kol oven, no harm shall befall a righteous man. On the other hand, Kari Rav alei de Shmuel, to praise the greatness of Shmuel in the scientific medical field, Kol Raz Lo Oneslach. And that apparently is, the first pasuk, I'm sorry, is not in Daniel, but rather in Mishlei. And the second pasuk is in Daniel, that no secret is withheld from you. And now we start the Mishnah of Simanim. This is a very important Mishnah and Gemara to identify kosher animals and non-kosher animals. Simani behema v'chaya nemru bin Torah. The Torah itself teaches us and spells out the simonim of both a behema and a chaya. And this is all in Vayikra Perek Chaf. I'm pretty sure it's Parshas Shmini. I have to double check that. Anyway, it says Vivdaltem in a behema hatahora latmeo ben of hatami v'tar. And the Torah goes on to delineate that which is a kosher animal, that which is a non-kosher animal. The Rambam actually codifies this in his Sefer Mitzvahs as a mitzvah say that one should be familiar with the characteristics that typify and identify a kosher animal. However, Simone Ha'of Lo Nemru, the Torah just tells us the 24 species of fowl that we're not allowed to eat, but doesn't give us Simonim, but the Rabbanan will give us Simonim. Amru Chachamim, Kol Of Hadores. Right, so we had the concept of Dores Drusa, that it's a predator and it digs its claws in and attacks its prey. That's a non-kosher animal. I don't know, Ira, if you ever heard of a book called Chorev. It was written by Rav Shimshon Fol Hirsch. Anyway,
Yeah. That's famous.
yeah,
Yeah.
in
It's
that
famous.
book, he shows you how the simonim that we're going to learn about, like for example, dores, that indicate a certain anger and aggressive nature of the animal, or sometimes in the case of a bird, that's all to teach us to avoid those midos, those attributes, those negative attributes. Like, for example, this oaf is a dores, that's, it's like, the ancient Rome, we want to conquer the whole world and subjugate the whole world. That aggressive kind of midah is something you want to avoid. Kol sheyesh lo etzba yisera. Okay, now the Chacham are giving us positive simonim, and there are 3 simonim in an oaf. The Rishonim go to town here where they have to see all the simonim, or one of the 3 is enough. But one thing is for sure, if it's a dores, then ipso facto, it's tame. Even if it has the next three simonim of kashrus, and it exhibits etzba yisera, right, an extra toe, so to speak, which if you take a look at the chicken, for example, it's got three major toes. The middle one is the longest one. And then sort of like towards the back, it has an added toe. And number two is zefek, which is a crop. That's to help the digestive system. Before the food goes all the way down to the kurkavon, which is called the gizzard, and it's niklaf. You can peel it. Those are the three simoni tahara that the Rabbanan gave us regard to ophos. To. Rabbi Lazar Reb Tzadok Omer, kol of hacholik es raglov tame. He has another simon tuma besides dores, and that is that parts of the toes of the feet will kind of part. In other words, it separates the toes. And that is a simon that it's a non-kosher bird. So the truth is that Rashi and the Meiri expand upon Rabbi Loza, and they tell us the following, that a bird, when placed on a twig or a string, puts two toes on one side of the string, two toes on the other side of the string, then it's a non-kosher bird. The Meiri adds that this characteristic of two toes on one side and two toes on the other side of this twig is indicative of a dores, a predatory bird. Now, exactly how the predatory bird utilizes, these two fingers and those two fingers in order to seize and attack their prey, that's not so clear. Apparently, two fingers grip the prey, and then another two fingers will carry the prey. And this apparently is a grip that's common amongst falcons, owls, parrots, woodpeckers, and other what do you call it, predatory birds. And once again, we have to know, is Rabbi Loza saying that that I need, in order to be metame the bird, I need another sima? No, probably Rabbi Loza is saying that this is ipso facto proof positive that the bird is a dores, and if it's a dores, then it is tame. Now we go on to grasshoppers. The truth is that this translation of the word chagavim as grasshoppers is not really accurate. The word chagavim, or chagav, is really a what's it called in English? A category, a general category that has many subcategories that are grasshoppers, locusts, and many, many varieties and species of crawling creatures. And the Torah says, "Et zeh tochlu mikol sheretz ha'of ha'holich al arba shelo kerayim mimal leraglov lenater bahem al haaretz." So in any event, what the Mishnah is going to give us is four characteristics which identify those species that the Torah permits. For example, the Torah permits arbe and slaam, chargol, chagav. So what are the characteristics of these creeping creatures that the Torah allows us to eat? Is number one, kol sheyesh lo arba raglayim. It has four legs. Arba knafayim, four wings. Kartsulim, okay, that's complicated. Those are legs that, in addition to the four legs, that somehow propel the creature. Two long jumping legs. attached to their bodies near the neck above the walking legs. Again, there's a whole machlokas here where these whatchamacallit, kartsulim are located. Is it towards the head of the locust or it's towards the back of the locust? And there's a certain kind of locust that the Yemenites have a tradition to eat, and some Moroccans also. And they have the kartsulim all the way in the back, sort of like below the walking legs. And the fourth simon of those creatures that were allowed to eat is knafav chofinis rubo. The wings cover most of the body. And we have here a diagram of the desert locust, which apparently is eaten by certain traditions, as we mentioned. And you'll see that they have wings that cover almost the entire body of the locust. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ushmo Chagav. It's not enough that you have the simonim, but the name has to be Chagav. And you and I might think, well, who cares what the name is? But apparently, according to Rabbi Yossi, the name is critical. It's not enough that it has four characteristics, as we delineated, but the insect has to be known as a Chagav in order to be matir eating it. So the Chagav is not just the name of a specific kosher species, which is mentioned explicitly in the Torah, but it's a more general term that includes all kosher types of creeping creatures. Now we get to fish. This is very famous. Hadogim kol asher yesh lo snapir v'kaskeses. It has skin, it has fins and scales. And I believe that it's enough if it has fins. I'm sorry, skip that. It's enough if it has scales, and then you know it has fins. So even if you cut off the fins, if it has scales, you're allowed to eat the fish. Because any fish that has scales has a snapir, has a fin. By the way, I once looked up the dogim in the Encyclopedic Talmudit. They have sketches of all fish, and they all look like nebuch.
Yeah.
By nebuch, they look like, like they couldn't do any harm whatsoever. And that's what I think is the point of Rav Hirsch and Chorev, that these are the fish that won't give us that aggressive kind of, predatory attributes. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shnei kaskasim v'snapir echad. It has to have at least two scales and one fin. V'elu hein kaskasim, hakvuim bo. Okay, so this has to do with the swordfish. I don't know if you would remember this, maybe it's before you were born, but the conservative movement came out with a ruling that you're allowed to eat the swordfish. Now, what's the issue of the swordfish? The swordfish has scales in the water. When it comes out of the water, the scales fall off. And this particular ruling, if you want to call it that, of the seminary, of the theological seminary, was that since it has scales in the water, that's enough to make it a kosher fish. However, if you look at the Mishnah in the name of Elu Kaskasim, it says Kvuimbo. So I don't know, Kvuimbo might be interpreted as meaning that even when it goes out of the water, it still has the scales. Haporeach Bahem and Snapirin, what are the Snapirin? Those are the fins that glide the fish through the water. Tana Rabbana, we learned to the Brisa, Elu Heim Simoni Behema. What does the Torah delineate as those signs of a kosher animal? Kol behema mafresis parsa and shosah shesa. It has split hooves and it rechews its cud. Kol behema shemalas malas gera biyadua she'ein la shinayim lemala utahora. So now, in order to identify a kosher animal, you need to be convinced that it has no upper teeth. Now, there are non-kosher animals that have, instead of upper teeth, they may have one or two very sharp teeth on top. We'll see about the donkey. But once it has any teeth whatsoever on the top, you know that it's treif. If, on the other hand, let's say you cannot check out the innards of the animal to know whether it's malagera or not, if it doesn't have any teeth at all on the top of its mouth, then you know that it is a kosher animal. Which, when you think about it, it's just mind-boggling how Chazal knew this. Anyway, Klolahu, so Gemara asks the following: Gamal. Let's take a look at a gamal. A gamal does not have any teeth in the upper half of its body, upper front teeth, and yet the Torah says explicitly we're not allowed to eat a camel. Tomit. So Gemara says, no, you're making a mistake. A camel has these few teeth up front that go even on top, and that's called nive isle. All right, it has these teeth in its upper jaw, very few teeth. Farei ben agamal. Now, wait a minute. When the camel is first born, for the first 6 years of its life, it doesn't have any of these teeth. So you're in trouble now, because you're going to look at this gamal, this ben gamal, this young, camel, and you're going to say, well, this is a kosher animal. Why? Because it has no teeth. And apparently the Gemara doesn't believe for one moment that it depends on whether the animal has teeth or not at this particular moment. It depends on the species. Vesu, and furthermore, hare shafan, varneves, which are explicitly prohibited by the Torah. Okay, these are different types of what they call them, hair, Hare, or a hyrax. Okay, whatever it is, they belong to like the rabbit family, and they don't rechew their cud. Or maybe they do rechew their cud. 1 second. Hare shafan varneves. You see, this translation of shafan and arneves as a hyrax and a hair is incorrect, because the hyrax and hair did not rechew its cud. And the Gemara says, Yeshlem Shinayim Demalas Gerahain, right? They're Malagera. And you wanted to tell me that if there are, if you want to know whether the animal is Malagera, check the teeth. Well, guess what? Yeshlem Shinayim Lamala. You will find in these, again, we'll call them types of rabbits, that they have teeth on top. Utmeim. So therefore, don't tell me that whether or not there are teeth on top is going to determine whether it's malagera, and it's only if there are no teeth on top, then it's malagera. Here's the case of an animal which is malagera, and yet it has teeth on top. So teeth on top does not prove one way or the other whether it's malagera. Viod, and furthermore, shinayim miksiva be'oraisa. So here the Gemara is saying, you know what? You're talking about a new simon with regard to animals. I mean, the Torah says there are two simonim. It malagera, it reaches its cud, and it has split hooves. The Torah doesn't say anything about whether it has front teeth, upper front teeth. Ella hachikama, the Gemara rewrites the brisa. If it's an animal and it doesn't have teeth on top, then we know for a fact that Yedua hi malas gero mafresis parsa utahora. So rather than check whether or not it rechews its cud, and we're not even going to look at its hooves, all we have to do is determine that it has no teeth on top. Any animal that doesn't have teeth on top is a kosher animal because it's malageva mafresis parsa. Now, if an animal does have teeth on top, is it malagera or not? Well, that's the case of shafan and arneves. That's not relevant to us. We're just trying to convey the halacha that if you check on top and there are no teeth, then ipso facto, it's malagera and it's a mafresis park. It's a kosher animal. So let's say, for example, you find an animal and its hooves are cut off. Or let's say, you're not scientifically inclined to identify the species as a Malagera. So then take a look and see if it doesn't have teeth on top, then you know it's a kosher animal. It's Malagera, and it's Mafresas Parsa. And Velivdok b'farsel, Kagon Shoy Parsel Chatuchos. There's no possibility of checking the hooves because they were severed. Ukir Rav Chizda, Rav Chizda. Hayamahalich b'midbar. You're out there in the wilderness and you found an animal. You got to eat. And Parsel Chatuchos. The hooves, you can't check out the hooves. They were cut out. Is podek b'pia. All you have to do is determine that there are no teeth on the top of its mouth. And you know it's Torah. Im lav. Let's say it does have upper front teeth, then biadua shehi tmeah. Now, there's one problem, and that is the gamal, right? Because the gamal, we said, doesn't have upper front teeth, and yet the Torah says it's tummy. So don't just tell me that you could check the top of the mouth. So the Gemara answers, gamal nive isle. It does have teeth on top. Again, a few canine teeth, and therefore it's not kosher. Now, what about the possibility that this animal that you found is a ben gamal? It's a camel in the first 6 years. It has no teeth on top because the teeth haven't developed yet. You're going to eat it, but it's a camel and it's tummy. El bilvad sheyakir ben gamal. You know that this is not a ben gamal. You've seen young camels. Lo amarta ika ben gamal. Now, once you admit that the ben gamal, which is a treifa animal, has no teeth, is then economy mino achrina de double ben gamal. Maybe there are other species out there in the veldt. When I was a kid, I don't know today, they used to say that, these expeditions or whatever you call them in Australia, they would go out to the backwoods in Australia. They would discover new species that man never knew about. So why are you telling me that, okay, the Ben Gamal has no teeth. It belongs to a species that's Tameh. But now I can assume that any other animal that I come across and you can't check the hooves, well, it doesn't have teeth on the bottom. Maybe there's another Ben Gamal out there, so to speak, another species that exhibits the same. Lo Salkadaitoch, the God knows, and he tells us, Ditani Debei Rabbi Shmuel. Do you remember, Ira, something called the Discovery Program? Does that ring a bell? From Eshat Torah?
Yeah, like they were like, oh yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
the Discovery
for sure.
Program, I never participated in it. Maybe I should have, but they have like
Right.
pamphlets, and if you
Right.
get their pamphlets, you'll see that the Gemara we're about to learn is one of the main proofs that God gave the
Oh,
Torah.
really?
Yeah, because they never found there are only 10 species of kosher animals in the Torah. They're all delineated. And thousands of years have gone by since the Torah was given. They never discovered an 11th category. There was an issue about a bison. You
Yeah,
remember
12.
bison? But then they
Right.
determined
Yeah,
that
yeah,
bison
yeah,
was
yeah.
really a buffalo. Anyway, the Tani, the
Right.
Beit Shmuel, Esagamal Kimal Gera, who? Look at that extra word, who. And what does that tell you? That Shalit Bo Lomo Yodea, the ruler of the universe, the creator of the universe, knows that the only species that rechews its cud that's tame is only the gamal, and that's why it says who meaning that's the only one. Leficha perkos of who. Now Rav Chisda says, now you can't check to guarantee that there are no teeth on top because the mouth was mutilated. So you have no choice, you have to check the hooves. In Parsel says Stukos, Piadushi Hitahora, in La Piadushi Tmeya. If there's no split hooves, like for example, the pig, right? The pig, right? So Ubavachi Yakir Chazir, you got to make sure you know it's not a pig. Because what did you do? I'm sorry. Scratch that. I made a big mistake. The pig has split hooves. I should know that. Yeah. I know that because Chazal compare Esav to the pig. and he shows you the hooves to show he's a kosher animal. But really, internally, he's treif. He doesn't rechew his cut. So therefore, if you're going to rely on the fact that you found this animal and it has split hooves, and therefore you could eat it, you better make sure it's not a pig. Lav amr to ika chazir. Now you already admitted me that in the universe there's something that has split hooves, and yet it's not kosher. Maybe there are other species in the face of the world that we'll discover in Australia that resemble the pig. They have split hooves, but they don't rechew the cud. Lo salkadaita Tony Rabbi Shmuel vesachazir ki mafris parsa who. Again, the extra word who with regard to mafris parsa to teach you that the pig is the only species on the face of the earth that ever will exist that has split hooves and does not rechew its cud. Rav Chizda, a third teaching of Rav Chizda. You're going in the so you can't check the teeth and you can't check the hooves. Is bodek b'besara? There's a certain muscle which we'll see what that is. And if that muscle runs both vertically and horizontally, which is called shesi v'arev, then b'yadushi tahora. A road, the wild donkey. So the wild donkey is a non-kosher animal who has this phenomenon of a muscle in a certain part of the body, which we'll get to, that's both vertical and lateral. So you got to make sure that you can identify an arad, a road is a wild donkey. By the way, they're very dangerous animals, the wild donkey. Lo amarta ika a road. Now you've admitted to me that the existence of a species called the wild donkey, which in fact has this muscle that goes both lengthwise and crosswise, is maybe there are others. Kmiri, here we have halach l'Moshe Sinai, that God told Moshe at Sinai that there's no such species, the only species on the face of the earth that has this muscle that goes vertical and lateral. And its treif is only the arod. The hechibodek, now where is this muscle? It's the flanks of the tail. Here there's a gigantic controversy what that means. Rashi reads it as tachas ha'oketz. We have the kanfei ha'oketz, under the tail. Below the hip bone of kosher animals, a special muscle that peels from the bone both vertically and laterally. Okay. Anyway, Simoni Chaya, now we get to the Chaya. Now, why do we have to know whether it's a behemoth or a Chaya? Because the Chelev of a Chaya is mutter. So I want to eat the Chelev. And you and I would say, who cares about the Chelev? But apparently the Chelev could be very significant, very substantial. And I want to identify that this is a Chaya. It's a deer. As far as Kash is concerned, we're in trouble because the Simone Chaya are identical to the Simone Behemo, which means it's Mafresis Parsa and it's Shesa. So now we're in trouble because we don't know how to identify a Chaya.
Isn't it also for Kisui Hadam?
Oh no. Sorry.
No, but you,
What did I just do?
oh,
Sorry. Can you see me? Oh no.
yeah,
So wait a minute. Maybe if I don't know what I pressed. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Kisei Adam. And also it's relevant to Kisei Adam because
right, because,
a chaya
right,
doesn't have chelev. Just 1 second, a behema
I
requires.
think it,
Behema doesn't require Kisei Adam and a chaya requires Kisei.
right, right, right.
Very good. Okay.